What's up, cool cats? It's Darren from Catholics Against the Tide, and today, surprise, surprise, we're going to talk about confession. It's a topic that Natalie and I actually already did a video on, but it's no longer up. It's not my doing. I'll admit that. I don't know if she was the one who deleted them, or a friend of hers, or a family member, or whatever, but they're gone. All the videos with her, except for the very first one, are gone. Anyway, confession. It's a beautiful thing, like I talked about in the last video. In order to have a confession or do confession, you want to start. Well, obviously, you want to start with finding out what time you can confess. I had to go to confession today, and my parish has confessions at 7:30 a.m. So I woke up at 7, or that's on weekdays. On Saturdays, they also have it from 11 to noon. So I woke up at 7 a.m. and I went down to my church to find out that the priest was sick, which meant no confession for today. And I was like, really? I woke up at 7 for this? So I went back home after praying a little bit, and I went to bed again. Woke up later, and oh yeah, that light is flickering weird. But I went back to bed, and I woke up again at like 1, and I was like, well, it's 1, almost 2, by the time that I realized what time it was. I gotta pray a rosary. And so I prayed my rosary, and I went downstairs to get breakfast, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And my stepdad told me that it was going to rain. This is just a long story of my weird day, by the way, I guess. But my stepdad told me that it was supposed to rain at like 3. And I was supposed to hang out with a friend at a park at 3. So I texted her, and I was like, hey, we're supposed to meet outside at 3, and it's supposed to rain at 3, like thunderstorms. And so we ended up not hanging out today, which worked out for me because then at around 3 o'clock, I was just kind of like, I was really hoping I could get to confession today. And so I went to the internet. I was like, probably not today, because I've looked at the South Bend Times, and nowhere in South Bend has afternoon confession, which sucks. Most of the places in South Bend only have it on Saturdays also, which also sucks. But anyway, I digress. I went online to look at confession times, and wouldn't you know it, the one church that I could find, it was like Saturdays at whatever time, but then also Mondays and Thursdays, which today is Thursday, following 5:30 p.m. Mass. So I was like, awesome. It's like 3:30 at this point. I'll chill for like 15 minutes, go on down to Sacred Heart Church at Warsaw, because that's where it was, attend Mass, and get my confession in. And that's exactly what I did. Around 3:45, I left. Maybe closer to 3:50, but I left. And I went and got gas first, because that's a 55-mile trip, which takes about a quarter of my gas, and it's about an hour long. So I went, and then I had like a half hour when I got there to chill and wait for Mass to start. So I got there, I went in, I prayed like half of another rosary just to pass the time. And then I just also prayed by myself. and Mass went on great. And then I went to confession, and it was awesome. So, know your confession times, and if you miss your confession times, look up times around you that you can go to. That's first of all. Second of all, examination of conscience. You have to make sure you know what you're confessing before you confess it. So take as much time as you need. I would say at least probably, 20 minutes, half hour, just in meditation, reflecting on what you've done since your last confession, or if it's your first confession, just what you've done that's sinful, that you need to tell the priest. And then really, the third step is to just go. So when you're there, you walk into the confessional after you've waited in line, and you can choose to go face to face with the priest, or you can have a screen between you so that he can't see you. I like to go face to face. It's a lot more personal, which is what you want, because they're in persona Christi, persona Christi. Which means that they're in the person of Christ, which means Jesus is literally speaking through them to you, and that's how they're also able to forgive your sins. So you pick whichever one, you walk in, and you make the sign of the cross, and you say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." And then you tell them how long it's been since your last confession, or if it's your first confession, you tell them that, and then you confess your sins, however many you have, however long it takes. Try to give at least a ballpark number of how many times you've done the sin, and try to get as specific as possible. Like, if you masturbated, don't just say, "I sinned of lust." Be like, "I masturbated 3 times in the past week since my last confession," or whatever. And then you tell them all your sins, and sometimes they'll talk to you for a little bit. Like today, the priest actually, I told him my sins, and he was just like, "What's your situation? Spiritually?" And so I explained, a briefer version of what I explained in my last video of I've been Catholic my whole life, and then I went a little over a year without being Catholic, and just within the past few months got back into it. And I also briefly said I've had visions and feelings and voices and physical pulls, which actually all of them led me here today, is what I told him. Because it did. I don't know what made me look up the times in Warsaw, but I was just I really feel like Warsaw has something to do with this. So I looked it up, and 5:30 Mass, and I was like, that's the perfect timing. So I went over to Warsaw. Alright, so you tell them your sins, they talk to you, possibly. Some of them will just be like, "Alright, get in, tell your sins, here's your penance, get out." But then, after they talk to you, they'll tell you your penance, which is kind of what you have to do to fully be forgiven of your sins. I don't want to say it's a punishment, because it's not a punishment, and it shouldn't be viewed as a punishment. But it's what you have to do to make up for the sins. So it could be as simple as meditate on this, or it could even be say a Hail Mary, say an Our Father, whatever. Or it could be, "Hey, for the next 10 days, I want you to read this book. It's a 10-step thing program, and I want you to read 1 step every day." And then, yeah. So it's all up to the priest, so technically it's all up to God as to what your penance is. And I bring this up not just because I went to confession today, but also because when I went to that non-denominational Christian event that I talked about in my last video, I was in a state of mortal sin, and like I tried to explain that to people, and I was like, I really think I would appreciate this more, if I were to go to confession. And they were like, what's confession? And I was like, oh, forgot. This not an all Christian thing. Which is being a cradle Catholic and living my life through Catholic school and in a Catholic community, that just blows my mind. Because I've never been exposed to that. Like, I've been exposed to atheists or, like, agnostics or something other than Christianity that have asked, but I've never been confronted by a Christian asking, hey, what's confession? I'm sure Natalie has gotten that question a lot more. But anyway, once again, I digress. That's what I'm best at. That's confession in a nutshell. The Catholic Church recommends you go at the very, very bare minimum once a year. But go as much as you need to. I like to say that it's good to go once a week, even if you don't need once a week. It's just great to have your soul purified like that. Tell little sins, tell like little white lies that you've told, or even just talk about like, hey, I could have gone to a friend and helped her, but I called her instead, and I feel guilty about that, or something. I don't know. I never know what to say unless it's a bigger sin. But then that also kind of brings us to mortal and venial sins. Venial sins, I don't want to say are less important, although they kind of are. They're like smaller sins, like, I don't know, I hit my brother on the arm because he was annoying me or something. I don't know how to explain that. But like smaller sins like that, and those can be forgiven just through receiving the Eucharist. And those hurt your relationship with God, versus a mortal sin such as premarital sex, other types of adultery, pornography, masturbation, using the Lord's name in vain, breaking any of the commandments, basically, is a mortal sin, and that breaks your relationship with God completely, and you have to go to confession in order for them to be forgiven. And again, be specific and say at least a ballpark number of how many times. Like I said, instead of I sinned through lust a few times, be like, I masturbated to pornography 5 times. Or even between 5 and 8 times, or something like that. Yeah, and just the feeling of your soul being purified is so great. Like, if you're like me especially, because then you can feel it. You can physically, like, feel right here being cleansed. And it's a great feeling. I think that's all I wanted to tell you about confession, at least this time. Maybe I'll make another confession video. Next week, I mean, I know I made promises about that before and didn't follow through. But next week, I had another video in mind. I don't remember what it is now. So possibly look for another video next week. I don't know. But pray for me. And once again, I will be praying for you. I don't want to say as always anymore, because there was that whole year and change that I wasn't praying for anybody, even myself. But I guess from now on, as always from now, I will be praying for you. God bless.